the reason for this was Carol and I did a talk at the Inbound conference, and through the promotion of that, we shared some of the numbers that we've had this year at Compound Growth Marketing. And I got a lot of people reaching out to me one-on-one about this, and about where, like, what I was doing, or, you know, how I had worked with Carol. And so I wanted to kind of open it up in kind of a fun format that's going to be informative. But also because, you know, I've talked to probably 10 to 20 agency owners over the last 2 weeks, and it's tough out there. And so, and I think some of these strategies can be really helpful for us in order to grow, because I think the landscape of sales has really, or the strategies that work in sales are not as effective this year as they were last year. And I think that's like not an overstatement, right? I think we like to on LinkedIn get into, you know, this is the year of mobile, this is the year of social, this is like, there has been a black and white change in my experience this year versus last year, in terms of the economic buyer coming in and having a little bit more of an opinion on where the money should be being spent. And so I think we'd be in a much different position if I was still selling the same way that I sold last year, and if I hadn't worked with Carol. Funny story, you just talked about Pete Caputa. So Pete Caputa is the person who put me in touch with Carol. And he did that after listening to me talk for 2 minutes about what my sales process was. So it had all kind of started out as a conversation on LinkedIn in the public of, you know, how once you get to a certain size agency, you should have someone full-time in business development. I said, I don't have anyone in business development. Pete, will you talk to me? Like, am I doing something wrong? He asked me what my sales process was. And within 2 minutes, he was like, you don't have a process. You don't have anything you're looking to accomplish. And really my goal in that time period was brainstorm some ideas with the client, try to perform a consultative sale, hope they like me. And I think really what I was relying on was the like brand impact, or the authority that I had built from the referrals that were giving me those leads, rather than actually building their confidence through the sales process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we worked on with Carol to improve, and hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, maybe half a dozen or so people sent in actual questions. And so I wanted to make sure that we address those, because they are probably going to listen to this recording later. But interestingly enough, each of the questions that got asked started to fall within, you know, what you might consider a typical sales process, so to speak. Like, as John was saying, I didn't really have one before. So I organized the questions according to how I might answer them, according to the beginning to the end of a sales process, and just doing it in 3 phases. But I want it to be, again, conversational. So any questions that you have, please type that in the chat pane. I may ask you, like, you know, what do you do with this stuff in your sales process, so we can kind of move it along. You can get some takeaways from it. But if there's a question that you're hoping that we answer, or a challenge that you want us to address, type it into the chat pane now, so that we can make sure that we get it to it before the next 30 minutes or so is up. And if you do want to, like, raise your hand and pipe in and have a question, please, you know, raise your hand with the little digital hand thing. We all know how that works, right? Or just physically raise your hand. I can see you on the screen, and we'll go from there. Sound good? So, John, I think that we talked about the numbers. You said at Inbound, and the thing that seems to have gotten everyone's attention was the 71% increase in close rate, the 14% increase in average order size. So you're selling more for more dollars. But then I think one of the things that was the most important aspect of this, and it actually relates directly to one of the questions that we had about how do you hand off the sale from, you know, being the salesperson to then like that delivery person. Can you share with everyone kind of what you saw happen with your team after this new sort of sales coaching and process was in place?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us are probably in marketing agencies, or come in from some type of practice where we weren't necessarily in sales previously. And so I just want to kind of address that elephant in the room that, the strategic process that I find a lot of us agency owners are focused on, or at least this was the truth for me, was I want to try to be as helpful during the sales process as I possibly can. And so that wasn't necessarily helping me uncover all of the questions that I needed to uncover in order to really set my the customer onboarding up. And so I think some of the questions, when I went through the buyer's first process, I spent 3 months working with Carol. We'd review almost every sales call that I had. She identified 5 phases of the sales process. Number one is identifying what the problem is. And I thought that was kind of a really critical kind of step for me in uncovering some of these questions that helped me understand the goals, the economic impact that this would ultimately have. And that is all information that I've started handing off to my team so they understand the broader context of why this company is coming to us and what they're looking for us to solve.
Yeah. So why don't we start there? So again, type in any questions that you have. Hi, Mindy. Thanks for joining us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with that first question that we have in that spreadsheet that we had shared together,
Okay.
John. Again, lead generation and finding our ideal buyers is going to, filling that top of the funnel, which is John's expertise. So I'm going to rely on him for some of this answer. But, Drew had asked what focus on prospecting leads and generally quality owned content to build community. How do we do this how to harvest so that when the economy is better, we have something to fall back on? And then Jake, thanks for joining us. Jake also asked about the most effective lead generation strategies in this new environment for digital agencies. Now, I know a lot of us, I've been doing inbound marketing for well over a decade, almost 2 decades now. And a majority of my business still comes from referrals and introductions. However, it's not a wait and see what happens kinds of a process. So, John, we talked a lot about referrals for lead generation activities, and I'll just share as far as most effective and highest value, quickest to close, referrals and introductions are still the #1 way to go. I think of it as this: everything else that you do, whether it's pay-per-click advertising on platforms, SEO, content, it's all of the fuel to feed the machine of getting better introductions and referrals, whether that's into enterprise companies or small business owners. So, John, your 2 cents on what are the most effective lead generation strategies that we need to be investing in right now so that we can basically be on the wave when the economy does turn around.
Yeah, so I think it's picking up those referrals and building those relationships. So I work within the growth system. Quick shout out to the cruising company team here. We have a scorecard of things that I'm doing every week that are I want to say this right, inputs, things that I need to do, like actions that I can do. I'm not looking for the end result. I'm looking for what are the things that I can do. And so, one of the best ways to start drumming up referrals is I set a goal to have 2 networking conversations every week where I just am trying to be helpful. And I think with a lot of us in the agency world, part of it is just about letting people know we still have a pulse. And so LinkedIn is that for me. It's not a top of funnel tool. Not a ton of people find me through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is more about kind of harvesting my network and then building authority in the middle of the funnel for people who are in conversations with me. The primary kind of mode of distribution is through continuing to develop relationships offline with people over coffee, over Zoom. And ultimately, when I'm falling behind on my pipeline numbers, I'm very active in going through contacting old people and making sure that, I'm getting active. And inevitably, when I do that 2 weeks later, I have a pretty good pipeline. So that's #1 for me. I think one of the ones you talked to me about though, Carol, was asking for referrals. And so not not being upfront, right? I've always kind of come with my marketing hat on, where we want to be useful, we want the brand, we want to build equity with people, but we don't focus on as much on what can you do for me. And so you miss out when you don't ask questions. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And I think figuring out the right time and how to ask for referrals has been really powerful.
Okay, so I want to give all of you something that you can actually start doing right now, as soon as we get off this call, on how to better ask for referrals. How many of you, just show of hands, are comfortable asking for referrals and you usually get the referral or type of referral you're looking for as a result? Raise your hands if that's true. Jake, yeah. Tim, yeah. Stephen, yeah. But we all probably can do it better. So the way that I like to ask for referrals or introductions, without, a lot of times I don't have to ask. Like John, I haven't even had to ask yet, you're all here. So the way that I would ask, if it's a client, for example, and they've been delighted with something in the process, and that something in the process can include, they were delighted with the way the buying experience went, they were delighted with the way they were onboarded, they were delighted with how you communicated things with them, they were delighted with how things looked. At any point that you feel that they're delighted with you, then there's some very simple questions to ask. So glad that this is working out the way that you had hoped for. I'm curious, who else have you talked to about this or bragged to about this? And who's the first person that comes to mind? A lot of times we ask for this general, anybody you know who's struggling with X, Y, and Z. And even though we're saying struggling with X, Y, and Z, it's still a very general way. It's hard for people to think of something specific to immediately then have that introduction or referral to make. So ask, who's the first person that comes to mind? Who have you bragged to about this? Who's complimented you about this? And then ask, that's great. How well do you know them? And do you think that the two of us would get along? And then ask, how or what is the best way for you to introduce us? Is it by email? What would you think would be most relative to say to them? And when would you be able to do that by? And you'll be surprised by the number of people that are get thought of, or even if they don't think of something right away, usually they're like, you know what, I don't know that particular person. If you have a specific person to ask, but I know someone like them. It's all about getting them to recognize and think of that first person that comes to mind. Is that how you do it now, John?
Yes. And I think I compared to like the psychology of, and I can't quote the report, but like, there have been studies where somebody has fallen down in the middle of the street and started crying for help, and people just continue to walk by them, right? Has anybody here that heard this? I'm seeing some nods, but like, somebody falls down, they start crying for help, nobody helps them. But when they say, you help me get up, or you call 911 or something like that, they're more likely to do it, right? And so when you just kind of broadly ask that question, it's an easy escape for them to not kind of put the referral or not really think about when they've actually done this in the past, versus when you ask more pointed questions.
It's also kind of like the difference, and this relates to how you present your options to buyers later in the process. The difference between the Cracker Barrel menu with the 8 pages of soups and whatever else is in there, and the 1-page 3-option bed and breakfast menu. It's a lot easier to choose from that 1-page menu than it is the 8 pages that you have to sort through. Don't make them think. That's a design book that I love.
One other thing, as we start to talk about pricing further down, which I want to make sure we get to, and talking about pricing, one of the things you talk about there is like being comfortable with silence, being comfortable with a pause. Is this another area where you would say this is a good place to be comfortable with the silence?
Yes, absolutely. I guess I would use the silence as a general rule at any place that you feel uncomfortable, is when you want to sit in that uncomfortableness for maybe 2 to 3 seconds longer than you think you should, because we always want to get out of it right away. So usually that's when you're asking for introductions, you're asking for feedback, or you're talking about price, or at the very end and asking for the business. And sometimes, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, when you have to ask those really tough questions, Because to John's point, the economic buyer, how to sell in the recession, which was one of the other most common questions that we got in, the thing that's changed the most since the last 2 years is the economic buyer is getting more of a voice in the conversation, and less people are used to talking with them, both inside the organization and out. And most of us, the majority of us, are uncomfortable discussing money, especially at a time when money is the thing that we're all thinking about the most. So it's a kind of a double whammy. And so we've got some questions in here. The other one quick thing that I'll give you all, we're all on here on this call together. Put your LinkedIn profile in the chat pane. So if you're not connected to someone on this call, we can be connected after this call. And the other thing is, when you're focused on a niche, and a niche being what you do, who you do it for, or the topic or message that you bring, then it makes it a lot easier for people to be able to refer you and for you to be able to collaborate services together. All right. Let me just see if there's any questions in here. Does anyone have a defined referral program in page with collateral? You're working on yours. So for my referral program, I have, my rule is this, is for clients, I try not to do the, I'm going to give you 10% off, because I feel that that kind of colors the referral and introduction. So John is not getting any money from any referrals that he gets. Pete Caputa wouldn't allow me to, even if I wanted to. But what I do for my clients who refer me is, give them advance notice on things. First in programs, I will, put them into programs for free if I can, like, free coaching or something like that, something that's going to help them to also move their needle forward. And for people who are like affiliates of mine, like my program is enmeshed in theirs, then there is some type of a monetary compensation, but that's a different type of thing. I always look at my referral programs as I'm always trying to give them something back in recognition of that. You have to decide what works best for you as far as whether you give a fee or a program or not. But I always try to also be fully transparent about that, because otherwise it's kind of, I don't know, shadowy in my mind. John, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Yeah, we have built out a referral program within our company, where we have a bonus under $1,000 that we give to anybody who sets us up with a conversation. We've defined that as the company needs to be in our ICP, and we have a pretty clear definition of what our ICP is. And then the questions that I've gotten following up on that are for a one-pager. We don't have a one-pager yet, but like, a lot of people have come to me and talked to me for my help in helping them set up a conversation with leads that they're bringing in. And so I think there are two things there. One is training your team on how to ask these questions when they're meeting with clients and they're talking with people in the industry, and training them on that, and then reinforcing the messaging so that they have something to actually talk about with the people who they're asking for referrals with.
Yeah, I do have a landing page, but it's a private one that I only share with people after I've had, a couple of conversations with them, and it's just to kind of gather information type. All right, so I want to go back to any list of questions that we had going on. So we've talked about prospecting most effective parts. Louise had also asked about getting enterprise companies accounts fewer than 6 months. And then how to get someone's boss involved to sell bigger. Those two questions kind of tag team each other. As far as the closing enterprise deals in less than 6 months, obviously it's going to depend on a number of factors, such as the solution, the offering, what how you define what enterprise is. I define it as more than 5 stakeholders involved and in more than a 6-figure fee. So I look at it at this actually the beginning of what we were talking about, which is referrals and introductions. Most enterprise deals, most account-based strategies are based on referrals and introductions to multiple people throughout the hierarchy. And so in order, again, for you to close those faster, the only hope that you're going to have of that is having multiple relationships within the stakeholders, as well as having clearly defined financial impacts and outcomes, like what happens if they don't do it, what's ROI if they do it, and how does it tie specifically your capabilities that differentiates you, is the accelerators to that. Discounting doesn't work for sure. And it's going to be a higher likelihood of churn later on, as well as difficulty to upsell and cross-sell those. John, you work with larger clients as well. What are your thoughts on accelerating enterprise deals?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember, but this was one of the places where I think I described it as I want to create more urgency with the clients that we're trying to close. And like you said, essentially, there's no magic bullet. But like what I would continue to go through here is like phase 1 and 2 of the buyer's first questions framework, which is one, identifying what the problem is and what the opportunity is. And then 2, why do they believe it's a problem? And sorry, phase 3, why is it important to fix? So I've started asking a lot of questions during the discovery to really understand if this is a burning need for the company. That's helped me qualify the company, but it also gives me the ammunition later on in the process to sell them harder, right? So I'm talking to companies right now. They're 3 months left in the year. And one of the things I'm trying to assess in those conversations is, are we talking because you're short on pipeline you're looking to deliver through the end of this year? Or do you understand what your goals are for 2024? But the leverage this gives me is I can go back to companies throughout the sales process and say, remember, you wanted to hit this number. If you want to hit this, we need to get started now in order to do so. So I've used that a couple of times, but the discovery question around why is this urgent? Why is this a problem for you? What's the potential impact going to have on your business? Those are all questions that aren't just used in the discovery phase to qualify. They can also be leveraged later on.
And I'm going to give you a couple of other drill down ones, because the next question on our list is, how do I get the boss involved? And if you're not asking the tougher questions, like the impact that this has, and if you're getting that business impact, awesome. Don't forget the personal impact, because everyone does things for their own personal and emotional reasons, and each person will likely have a different one. And obviously, so think also too, in order to get to that economic buyer and to be able to understand what the business impact is, it's not just understanding, yes, do they have a problem? Everyone thinks that they do. It's also the question of, and this is the economic piece of it, are they willing and able to make the decision to do this and go forward? And to John's point, if there isn't enough urgency there to do so, there's not much you can do to create it, but there is ways that you can test for it. And so asking these questions is going to save you a lot of heartache later on. And it's also, as to John's point, going to give you the ammunition to be able to remind them of why we set these milestones and steps in place. All right, so we have a couple more minutes. And
hand raiser.
We have a hand raiser. Who's our hand raiser?
Layla.
Oh, Layla.
I hope that's okay. I was like, my question
please
is
for it.
a bit hard. Okay. So I like all the points you guys are making. And I think we all can, is even us personally, like meeting the end of year goals. With that, my question is, how do you bridge between like the marketing and the sales team? And this is where I find a lot of difficulty, because to everything you've said, like the red carpet of like the PPC, the content, even now what you just mentioned, John, like to me, that's content that I can create, a problem, solution. How do we help? But then there's a disconnect with like what I can offer versus like what the sales team is listening to on calls, is the kind of urgency that they're doing. But at the end of the day, like I have to meet my marketing goals. So how can I additionally support the sales team when I'm not able to be in person? Like even networking on LinkedIn and so forth, that's more of like the sales team like sitting there and building that funnel.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question. I'm also happy to take it offline as well. But one of the things I would say there is we want to arm our sales team with as much information in the CRM as we possibly can. And one of those indicators is around like the intent to understand what else is happening inside of that company. So, you know, depending on what you're selling, like I sell advertising services, I can look at, you know, I can populate data in my CRM about how much a company is spending, or, you know, understanding the industry they're in. If you're selling toys, you're coming into like the big season, right? And so, understanding what industry that company is in and how it may relate to them, and providing your sales team with that data in the CRM is really powerful. And then also the sales team understanding why they're talking to a lead, why a lead was qualified. Did they come in through a demo? Did they download an ebook? There are going to be two different ways to handle those conversations. So giving them that information as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Very helpful.
A couple of other things too that I would have you leverage during sales conversations about how to tie your marketing efforts to the sales efforts. I used to have a marketing agency myself, and so I've been on both sides of this. Is especially today, if you look at the buyer's journey and how much of that journey is spent either on the website or somewhere else before they've ever even talked to a salesperson. And so it's partly about being, to John's point, what are the intents and things like that you can feed to the sales team that give them that intel to have those conversations. But then a lot of times, if you're coming into organizations where they've never done marketing before, they've always had, their sales teams going outbound or getting referrals and introductions. It's about how do you start to scale their efforts? And so if you want to be able to get your company growth to here, you're not going to be able to do that in the same ways with the same investments that you've done before. And so depending on what type of marketing you're doing, if it's the branding, if it's top of funnel, if it's conversion, if it's technical and website designs, there's going to be the investments that they need to make to be able to scale their sales efforts. Another good question that I would ask when I was a marketing agency was, in your win-loss analysis of your deals, how many of your customers didn't know about you or didn't know if you were credible enough to do business with? And if they haven't done that, then find a referral partner where they can get that done. But even asking the question makes them wonder, maybe we are kind of prohibiting some of the sales from happening by not investing in marketing.
Fair enough. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. And we have like 10 minutes left. I feel like we've covered most of the questions. Any other specific questions? We've talked about selling in the recession, getting to the economic buyer. John, a couple of other people have read about the book. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that everybody knew is that if you do purchase a book this year, I am doing free monthly group coaching sessions, book club kinds of sessions, where you can bring your specific questions in or an opportunity that you have that you might want to go through. Those are going to be free every month. And we are also putting on some group coaching sessions this quarter for everyone to try and either close out this quarter or get set up for 2024. So I will share that link as well with everyone. Any other questions?
One other thing. Sorry, what was the last question? I had one more thing on top I had one more. What was the last question we just answered? Sorry.
About sales conversations and tying your marketing efforts into the sales outcomes.
Oh, no. Before that, sorry.
Oh, so you're really testing my my memory now.
How to get to the person's boss.
Oh, yes, how to get to the person's boss. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the parts of the buyer's first kind of consulting that I went through with Carol was an assessment at the very beginning. And the assessment was to help me understand the type of seller that I was. And there was a part of that assessment where it had you look in the mirror a little bit and asked you how you like to be sold to. And so I think one of the things with the buyer's first framework one of the things to recognize, one of the learnings that we can take with is kind of recognizing how you like to purchase things is probably going to impact the way you sell your product. And I think that's a really important recognition to make and understand that not everybody purchases like you. So there are going to be different personality types who like to be sold to different ways. When we talked about getting to the boss, it's another place where I think silence is really silence is an important kind of strategy to be able to execute. So I would encourage people to take some time, even with coworkers, with friends, allowing yourself to put them on the spot a little bit, or, asking some tough questions and build that muscle internally. Because I think when you're asking to speak with the boss or speak with the manager, one, you want to articulate it. It's not like, we're not going to be in there like when I'm at Applebee's saying, can I speak to your manager? That's not the tone we want. But we do want to, we want to uncover who is actually the economic buyer in this purchase, which I got away with not doing the first 5 years of my business and wouldn't have been able to get away with this year, but also, allowing the silence to come in when people are saying, when you're asking if the boss should be on the next call.
Okay, so here's how you can ask those questions, and this is what it will sound like. So I'm going to just do this with you, John. You pretend to be the buyer. Okay. So John, what I'm hearing you tell me is that if your teams don't start increasing their conversion rates on these marketing leads, then you're going to have to either start firing some people or look at alternate ways of growing the business. Do I have that right?
We're not going to be able to raise capital, and so that would probably lead to layoffs.
So, when you've bought these types of things in the past, what was the process that you needed to go through in order to get it approved for payment and budget and so forth?
Yeah, so in the past, it was really easy. This year, our CFO has really come down on me and is, asking me what the impact is going to be of each of these decisions.
And when he says impact, what is he looking for?
He wants to see additional pipeline coming in that could potentially close in the future.
And do you know how much?
So our goal this year is to get to 30 million in revenue. That's net growth of 10 million. And so we need to drive probably 40 million in pipeline in order to get that 10 million.
Okay. At what point do we need to get him involved in the conversation?
He's really busy. And I don't think you want to talk to him. He's a really tough negotiator. He used to be an FBI negotiator.
What is his name? Chris Voss?
Yes. Yeah. How'd you know?
Well, and I'm sure he has some specific questions as well, as far as what that impact is going to be. When you present this to them, what are the typical questions that you think he's going to ask?
I think he's going to ask how long it's going to take us to get to impact, and then what the impact could be.
Okay. And how would you answer?
Well, do you have a one pager you could send me? Now that I'm thinking about it, I could answer those questions, but I think it would be good for us to get on the call.
I mean, do you really? I was going to say, do you really think a one pager is going to answer your CFO's questions? I don't think he's going to be real happy with that.
A little bit there.
Especially if he doesn't have any time. If we can answer his questions in 10 minutes, that helps him feel comfortable making this decision so that you can hit those numbers so that you can get your promotion out of it.
Yeah.
Then, I'm willing to talk with Chris Voss and be on the hot coals for 10 minutes for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how, do you have an access to his calendar?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Let me see. He schedules 2 weeks out. So, actually, do you have time can you meet next Wednesday with him?
Yeah, sure. What time?
3 o'clock.
Yeah, I can move some things and I can talk to him at 3 o'clock.
All right. Sounds good. He's a tough negotiator, so be ready.
Yeah. So I know you're probably thinking this doesn't really happen this way in real life, but if I can find the recording of my sales call and you don't believe me, I will send you one where, I don't know if this was on Zoom, it might've been on phone. I asked this series of questions to it was a subsidiary company of a German parent company. And the CEO is the German in Germany and doesn't speak very good English. And so when I asked the president of the subsidiary, I said, so what kind of questions is he going to ask you and how do we get him involved in the conversation? There was this very long pause. He said, you have no idea how much credibility you just won just by asking the question. He goes, unfortunately, he doesn't speak English and I don't know that you'd want to try German just yet. So it actually, even if you're not going to get to that decision maker, especially if you're having a conversation with someone in sales, just asking the question is going to earn you the right to ask another question and gain their respect. And because if you're trying to talk with salespeople and they have you in this marketing bucket, they don't think that you know anything about sales. So when you ask good questions like that, it kind of is like, oh, they really know what it's all about. So it gives you some cred. Awesome. All right. Do we have any last minute questions?
The only other thing I'd add there is, when you're asking the questions about the goals, about the timeline, about the impact, you're setting yourself up better for that conversation of asking to speak with the personal level up, right? Because like Carol said, those are all kind of credibility raising questions that a lot of the other firms aren't asking. They're, a lot of people's natural inclination in sales is to start developing the relationship and not ask some of the hard questions. And so showing you're a strategic thinker, I think this isn't proven, Carol, maybe it is proven, but I think that is going to help you align better as a partner in the sales process with someone rather than as someone who is just selling things. And,
Yeah.
If they're putting you in touch with the CFO, they want to know that you're not going to, just be like, oh, we're going to help you get more likes or, whatever it is. They want to know that you're going to be looking at what the actual business impact is going to be.
There is research behind it, which is in the book.
Okay.
Because here's the thing is that we all think that people need to like us in order to buy from us. And so if we ask tough questions that make them uncomfortable, that they don't like, then they're not going to like us and then they're not going to want to buy from us. Also, it's uncomfortable asking these questions. So the pause is important to be able to be sitting in that. But here's the other side of it is that it's only by asking those tough, hard questions that you actually gain their trust. Because anyone who says yes to everything, we don't trust because we don't believe that they stand for anything. So pushing back, or when people come to you and they want this, but they have this problem and you know that it's not going to work, it's your responsibility to push back and say, no, I can't do that for you. It's not what you actually need. And here's why. That's how you're going to build the credibility and trust to be introduced to people's bosses.
Right. We had a good question in from Andrew, so I want to make sure we get to that.
Where did it go?
I just put it at the bottom.
Okay, is that if any systems to manage the last 10% of the sales process? Oh, so the last 10% of the sales process, you've identified the challenges, the offer, answered some questions. I'll get back to you on Friday.
And for
That is a
context,
lot.
I'm Andrew. For context, this never happened. I run a coaching and advising practice 2.5 years in. Up until May this year, it never happened. It would usually be one call closes or I'll get back to you today, and they would get back to me today. And things changed in May, where I ran my same process, but it stopped being as effective. And I got a lot of, yeah, it all sounds good. Let me just get back to you Friday. And 0% of those ever closed. And so I know that there's a miss there. I just don't know what the miss is and how to fix it.
Okay, so do you ask why Friday?
No.
There's a start. What's significant about Friday? What's going to be different Friday? What's going to be different in a week? And here's the other thing, and this is what I'm also seeing as well, is yes, people are excited. I think this is great. This is going to be wonderful. I just gotta, let me think about it. And what they're trying to do is think about, do I actually believe enough in this to invest the cash that I have right now in it? And so we have to qualify or test even more for their willingness to decide. So when they say, great, I'm super excited about this and I'm ready to get started. And you say, okay, great, it's going to be $8,000 for the first 12 weeks. And they're like, okay, sure. And then you have to ask a little bit more. Is that something that you're comfortable investing right now? Or is it worth for you to invest that now if you're going to get 4x of that in the next 6 to 12 months? How will you get that cash right now? Do you have that on hand, or do you need some time to move some things around? Those are uncomfortable questions to ask, but those are also the questions that we need to ask when someone says, yes, that's great. I'm all set. I'm comfortable. If they're really ready to go, then they're not going to have any problem answering those questions. If they're not, then that's when you're going to find out and you don't have to wonder what happened. Cool. Awesome. All right, everyone.
And I would say you set yourself up throughout the process with the questions to be able to answer this. I also think what you pushed me to was, understanding why Friday. And then when you understood why Friday, starting to schedule a call after they were supposed to meet with that person. But like those initial questions are going to help you understand why and what the urgency is, so you can kind of get a feel for why this is going to slow down versus not. And then I think that was it, but I'm looking at like what the problem is, what's going to happen if you don't achieve the results that you would achieve with me. Understanding that, pausing, being quiet, letting them answer that question.
What I've been trying to do is to present the offer earlier for folks who I want to present the offer to, so that there's more time for that. I think in the past, it was just too crunched at the end. And when money was flowing, I didn't need the time, but I think I also need the time now. One, I need to know what to ask, but two, I need to make sure I have time to ask it.
Yeah. The other thing is, after you provide that offer, what is the offer?
For someone working with me in a coaching engagement, we'd work together for 4 months, meet twice a month.
So it's like the SOW, it's like the contract with the offer.
Yeah.
So the other thing there is, asking, and we've already said that. So all these things kind of play into each other, I think, a little bit, but what are the objections going to be to this? Because that also helps that person get into the mindset of, okay, what's actually going to happen when I have to pitch this to my boss? And it helps you kind of handle any objections that their boss may have, so they can take those on the call that they have with that person.
I mean, the other thing too is, you want to think of the right questions to ask, but sometimes someone said that John's improv skills are off the charts. We did a lot of practicing this way together too. So that's part of the reason why. The first couple of times that we did it was not so smooth. But what I will say is this, is that a lot of times improv is just going off of what you're given. It's the yes and accepting whatever's going to come next. And so thinking of the next question, it's kind of just being related to getting the clarification of the question that you had before. But then the other thing is, just if you're thinking it in your head, be completely transparent about it. You know what, Andrew, I'm going to have to think about this until like Friday. And then I might add, or back to that person, I might say, why Friday? And well, I've got some things that I need to sort out. Okay, you know what, Andrew, normally what happens when I hear people say, I'm going to think it over and by Friday, I usually never hear from them again. So what's the thing that's standing in your way about being comfortable doing this? And then you just wait for the answer, and they're going to say whatever it is. And then, there's another thing that you can do is, I call it the 3-question close, or the natural close. Do you believe that I know everything that I need to know? Now, one little point of context, John had said, understanding what is the problem is the first stage. What it really is understanding, what do they think the problem is? What is the challenge or the issue that they have? What do they think it is? How did they get to that conclusion? And because you are the expert here to be able to counter that if you need to. So first closing question is, do you believe that I understand everything that I need to? Yes, no, anywhere in between, you have to dig into that. The third question is around, do you believe that I have the expertise to solve this and help you reach your goals? Yes, no, or anything in between, dig into. And then finally, do you want my help? And if you get 3 yeses to that, then there's no reason to wait till Friday. If you get anything other than that, then you can dig into it on the call, or schedule a call to dig into it later if you run out of time, to your point. And honestly, most of your calls don't need to be more than 7 to 9 questions for discovery. We don't need a ton of litany. The data from Gong suggests 7 to 9, because after that, they start to get question fatigue. So you want to make sure you have good targeted questions, but, maybe plan 5 or 6, which gives you some improv space to add some additional questions in.
Awesome. And I am glad we got to do some improv, because I think that was one of the things that Carol and I did most when we were going through kind of reviewing the calls. I posted all my calls into Dropbox. She would go through in the timeline and make notes on some of the things I did throughout that call, like ask this question here. And we did this because I got a number of people reaching out to me. I even had a call yesterday with somebody reaching out to me saying, hey, I saw some of the things you posted about inbound. I'd love to hear what you thought about the sales coaching you did with Carol. I wanted everybody to kind of get a piece of that, because I think this year has been the most stressful of the 6 years in my life, in large part because there is less demand out there for the services that a lot of us are selling. And so I'm not getting endorsed for this. This isn't meant to be an infomercial. I actually am really happy with the amount of information that came out, but I would also suggest, if you found this helpful, talk to Carol and, you know, talk about the different options that she has right now for coaching. I'll warn you, it can be a little bit uncomfortable at times. Like some of the role play, some of this improv is a little bit uncomfortable, but I think that's healthy for a lot of agency owners like us in kind of learning how to take the next step in sales, and also creating more of a process for our goals of what we're trying to establish throughout the sales process. So I would highly recommend talking to Carol. It was a great experience working with her, and I think I learned a ton during that period.
With the old saying, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So it's like, we're not consistently challenging ourselves. And I think it was Warren Buffett that said, the best investment you'll ever make is the one that you make in yourself. I invested in this process and then, well, I created it, but started this process for myself. I think I spent the last $1,000 that I had in my bank account in order to start going through the program with Pete. And I was like, everyone's like, you're out of your mind. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, everything else I'm doing isn't working. So there you go. All right, I got to run too as well. Thank you, John, for this. Everyone for sticking around. The recording will be up. I'll send an email out to everyone with the relevant links for the recording in 90 days, and definitely reach out to chat. All of this book I wrote because of the place that I was when I first started my agency. So it's, again, kind of come full circle that now I'm doing this work. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, y'all.